Hello, everyone. So, since class the end of class caught me by surprise on Thursday, so we're going to redo the group part of this a little bit, just as its own little concise, reviewable thing. The first part of this video will be what we did in class, what's expected of this class. The second part will go a little bit more in depth for those of you that really want to get into animation, because groups are a very important part of the animation. So, what is a group? I have my solar system here. Oh, whoops, we haven't gone over how to open that yet. I'm going to actually go to show grid and turn that off just because I hated being there when all my other stuff is out here. And what we want to do, the problem we're running into that groups solves is that if I have Mars, right, and I want to orbit it around the sun, how do I do that? Because the rotation somewhere tool, here we go, is obviously centered on Mars. It's on center mass. Now that's great if I wanted to animate or rotate it to do with its own, orbit. I know my rotation tool works differently than your guys's. It's a different setting. Don't worry about that. Right. So the rotation for the days on Mars, right? That's taken care of. But how to do it for the sun? Like how to do the orbit? I could move this pivot point over to the sun and then rotate around. However, that would not allow me the chance to, orient the planet if I needed to. If I wanted to rotate, maybe I want to make this a very scientific diorama and I want it to be, I need to put the poles in a different place. There's a lot of reasons why I really need this to stay right here and I need a different pivot point over here. I need multiple pivot points. And that's where groups come in. Now I'm going to switch to the attribute editor to talk about this because we have the 3 tabs here that make up a thing. Tab 1 is exactly like your channel box. It's the transforms. That's the important part that we're dealing with today, right? It's the translate, the rotate, the scale, right? Translate, rotate, scale. Then there's the shape node, which is this wireframe part right here, right? That's the shape. And then there's the shader, which is the material that has been applied to the shape. And it takes 3 nodes, all 3 of those nodes, to make this one little reddish marble. That's the program we're dealing with. What we need is another one of these. We need another transform node. That's where groups come in. As we said in class, you hit Control G. Hold on. Before I press that, I am at home and therefore my settings are different. Edit, group, you see the hotkey right there, but right next to it is a little options box. And I check to ensure, good, that it says origin, because most of the time when you group stuff together, you actually put the pivot at the center. But in this one instance, because we're rotating around the sun and the sun is at the origin, we're saying the origin. So I say group, which is the same as Control G. If you go into the menu, once you say group, that's the same as Control G. Now make sure you only do this once, right? We name this Mars Orbit and I hit enter to ensure that it is named that so that you can see that it's changed up here at the tab. And now I have this new transform node that says Mars Orbit and it has translates and rotates and scales. And the rotate is near the sun. It's on top of the sun, which means I can rotate this around this way. Now, what to do if I click off? Whoops. My regular Mars transform node is still there. I can still orient this however I need to. I can still give it its days in rotation if I wanted to. But how do I get back to the orbit? I hit up on the keyboard. If I hit up on the keyboard when I'm clicking on a planet, it brings me to the planet's group, right? It brings me up that chain. If I hit down, it brings me back to the planet. Or if we prefer something that we can see, as I do, if you look to the left, we have our manipulation tools or manipulators, and then we have some view tools. This is the 1 view, this is the 4 view, like when you hit spacebar. But at the bottom is and if you hover over it, it should anyways. Oh, my tooltips aren't showing up. It should say outliner. It should say we'll show outliner. And then that way you can get a list of all the things that are in your file. And I turn on my tool clips, which means I should be able to start seeing more information. Haha, there we go. Show or hide the outliner. The outliner lists all the stuff in a file. By default, it just lists certain types of things. It doesn't list shape nodes, but it does list the these are the transform nodes. So you click on these, you can see all these various things. And now Mars is technically under Mars orbit. There's this little plus. You can click that. There's the shape. There's the group. You can see the group has this different type of symbol. That's how it's telling you it's a group. And I can do that for all of the planets. I go to Venus, I say Control G, and I say Venus orbit. Enter. And you can see what it did here in my outliner. And it put these two things together. And I can then move Venus over here. And if I click off, I can get the orbit back either by clicking the planet and clicking up. You can see it changed there, or I can just use the outliner. I recommend getting used to the outliner because I have been told by many professionals that it's huge. They use it a lot. I'm very bad about using it. I never got into the habit, but it is a substantial tool for people who work in the industry. So what you want to do for this assignment is group all of the planets to themselves. Group Mercury to itself and use this group to, change how things are oriented, right? Change how things are going so that they're not just like all sitting in this boring line, right? And when you're done, you should have something that's a little more, pleasant to look at. Through the magic of pausing, I went through and put most of the things in groups, named them blah, blah, blah orbit, and kind of maneuvered them around, into this more interesting arrangement. Now, a couple of things before we get to the bonus stuff at the end. How to deal with two things at once. Well, here I have Saturn and Saturn's rings. What do? Well, we select both at the same time, which I can just drag select to grab both. If you prefer click selecting, you will need to go back to your regular manipulator, just hit Q and hold down Shift, but I prefer dragging. And when you do that, you get both items at once. You can see they're both selected over here. I hit Control G. They both go under that same group. So I call this Saturn group. No, I call it orbit. That's what we're calling it. And then when I click this, you'll see there's two things listed. So both items are under that same orbit, and therefore both items will follow that group. All right. Now, I'm saving Earth for the bonus section afterwards. But what I want you to know is that this concept of groups and things, we're going to kind of touch on this as we go throughout the semester. There are ways it can be helpful in modeling. There's going to be times where when we're building things, it helps to have a pivot point that's somewhere else. But if you're in animation, stay tuned for this next part because this is where the rubber really meets the road, and groups become sort of vital. Right, so, but if you're just trying to get the solar system done, then you can consider this over. Animators. So, because of a different semester, pre-pandemic, etc., this file actually has a moon for the Earth in it, and it's basically just a copy of Mercury that I moved out further and made the scale to 0.1 instead of 0.2. Obviously, not to scale with the planet Earth, but whatever. But the question becomes, I've got Earth in an Earth orbit, which allows me to do this. Hello? But of course, the moon does not follow. And even if we get the moon to follow the way Saturn's rings are following, we still need the moon to orbit around the Earth. How do we do this? We need more than one group inside a group, basically. You can create chains of hierarchies, because that's what this is, right? These two things underneath Saturn orbit, they are following. They're children of Saturn orbit. Saturn orbit is the parent. And if the parent moves, the children must move. But the children can kind of do, whatever the crap they want. It's kind of like, think of it like a dog on a leash, too. That's another way of thinking about it, where the owner is, walking along the beach, And the dog can run around kind of all over the place, but they still have to follow a leash. So we have the moon for Earth, and then we have Earth, and then we have the sun. The moon needs to orbit around the Earth the same way Earth will orbit around the sun. So how do we do that? Well, step one is we group the moon to itself. And we can call this moon orbit, or yeah, I guess moon orbit is the only thing we can call it. But of course, its pivot point is way the heck over there. How do we change this? Well, there's a way to change it, and the easiest way is to actually go into a different view. So I hit spacebar to get the 4 view, and then hover over the top view to get that. And I have no idea where my planets are, so I gotta go moseying around a little bit. Cool. Now you'll probably be in your rotate tool because that's what we've been doing this whole time. Make sure your moon orbit is what's selected, and grab your move tool, your translate tool. So in order to move the pivot point, you need to be in the move tool. And then the other thing you need to do is have a keyboard with an insert key on it, which if you're on a laptop may not be the case. But there's no other way to get this. So you hit the insert key and you see that the cursor changes. And it allows us to move the pivot point without the objects moving. Now this is a vital component of animating, is moving the pivot point. And we'll probably do some stuff with modeling eventually where you want to rotate something around something else. Another thing that is vital, snapping. There's some different types of snapping out here, including snapping to grid, snapping to curve, snapping to points. If we were on the grid, we could snap this to the grid and it would center on the Earth, but we're not. So I'm going to hold down, hold up a second. No, okay. For some reason, I thought the Earth wasn't centered. It doesn't look centered. But I'm going to hold down V on the keyboard. And you see I press V, let go, press, let go. And it changes that cursor. That means snapping has turned on. And you can see that when I first pressed it, it kind of went whoop. And it's hard to tell, but as I'm dragging it, it's kind of stopping at certain increments. And it's snapping to points. And so it'll pick a point. Once it gets to the center, it'll snap to that point. Otherwise, it was snapping like to the edge of the Earth. The other thing we could do if we wanted to is we could select the Earth just with a regular move tool. Hold down X. Oh, nope, that's not the regular move tool. There we go. Hold down X and move the Earth to somewhere on the grid. And then I select the moon, hit up to get that orbit. Hit insert to move the thing. And this will allow me to, yeah, you can see how it's only snapping to the grid right there. It'll snap directly to the grid. So now I know the moon will orbit directly around the center of the Earth, which is what we want. I hit W to get my regular tool back. And then I hit spacebar to get out here. And you can see that when the moon orbit is selected, the pivot point is in the center of the Earth. But if the Earth orbit is selected, the pivot point is in the center of the sun. Right? So this rotates around the sun, and the moon can rotate around the Earth. But of course, as you saw, the moon still doesn't follow the Earth. So this is the part where we have to make a compound group. Earth orbit is over here, only the Earth is underneath it. Moon orbit is under here, the moon is underneath it. I can select the moon orbit. It is a node, it is an item. You can't see it over here, but it exists. And I'm going to middle mouse drag. I'm going to grab my middle mouse button and drag this over the word Earth orbit. Not Earth, Earth orbit. And you can see it kind of gets outlined, and then I drop it. I let go. And it has dragged moon orbit underneath Earth orbit. So the moon is under the moon orbit, is under the Earth orbit, which means if I select the Earth orbit, the moon follows. But I can still go to the moon orbit and rotate that around as much as I want. Right? So if you have any moons in your solar system, that is how you would do it. And you can see I rotated the moon around, um, but if I now move this, the moon's orientation to the Earth remains the same. It's just that the Earth changes its orientation around the sun. Um, so that idea of a complex grouping system is going to be key once you get into animation. The grouping system is directly related to joints and rigging systems. It's both used in them and is a parallel idea to them. So keep that in mind as you're getting used to grouping. We'll use it a little bit this semester, but if you're going to be taking 3D2 and wanting to get into animation, then this is going to be a key idea you want to pay attention to.